Okay, welcome to our next video for JT Airlines. So we've just completed our virtual storage appliance setup, which is going to be providing the storage to our vSphere environment. So the next step is to configure our first ESXi host. This host will be configured as you can see on the screen. It's going to have two physical NICs. We'll configure standard switching, and we'll configure the relevant port groups and VM kernel ports. We'll configure the storage, so we'll connect our ESXi host to the newly created virtual storage appliance. And once we get to that stage, the server will be pretty much ready for the vCenter installation. And once we've got that up and running, we'll be able to configure out. So the plan is to have 3 ESXi hosts in our Melbourne data center. So this will form the first one. Once we've got vCenter up and running, we'll add number 2 and number 3. Just to double check on the diagram, as you can see, we've done the VSA right there all the way on the left hand side. So now we're just to the right of that is the MEL ESX1. We're going to run ESXi 6.7 for now. We'll have 4 port groups, 4 VM kernel ports for management, iSCSI, and vMotion. We'll have an additional port group for our virtual machine network, and the standard 24-bit networking and gateway and DNS addresses will be the same like everything else. So, without further ado, let's get into labbing it. Right, so back in our lab, I've already gone ahead and downloaded from the VMware website, which is as long as you've got an account, anybody can go in and download the software, I believe. I don't think you need a license. I'm pretty sure you can download a trial version. So I'm using 6.7. If 6.7 is not available to you, it doesn't really matter if you use version 7 or even version 8. That's just being newly released. I'm going to start with 6.7, which is this ISO just here that I've got highlighted. I've just added it to my lab server. So it's pretty straightforward, the installation. So again, it's like it's going to be treated like a physical machine, like everything else that's up here. I know they're virtual machines, but for the purpose of this lab, they are considered physical machines. Just go with a new virtual machine. I don't think I need to do anything other than just typical. It's because it's pretty straightforward. I can find the ISO. Let's back it out to here, down to VMware. I'm just looking for the one that I just added just a few moments ago, which is this one. And it can tell us that ESXi has been detected in this ISO. Beautiful. We'll call it MEL ESX1. And for now, I'm happy for it to just be on the D drive. And generally speaking, today we probably need, once upon a time, if you're not using local storage for your ESX environment, if you're using like iSCSI storage or fiber channel storage, back in the day we probably installed SD cards in our physical host to run the operating system, and they usually used to sit on 8 gigabyte or 4 gigabyte SD cards. These days, SD cards, I don't believe are supported anymore from VMware's point of view. So what we're seeing now is most of the hardware that we sell is with actual either NVMe disks or SAS disks or something like that in a sort of in a RAID 1 mirror setup. So I'm just going to go with a 20 gig disk. That seems to be more than enough to run the OS. It's saying 40 gig, but I usually get away with 20, which is more than enough. And again, we can expand if we have to. 20 should be fine for the lab environment. And I'll just customize the hardware. So this is like treating this virtual machine like a physical server, like a HPE deal DL360 or something like that. And it's it's going to have one or two disks. In my case, just the one for the operating system, and it's going to have two network cards. So these would probably be typically like a 40 gig network adapters or above. Back in the day, I think I used to set up hosts where there were 8 1 gig NICs, and we'd assign 4 to iSCSI and the other 4 to management and vMotion and virtual machine traffic and stuff like that. But obviously, in this day and age where we've got higher bandwidth possibilities, 2 NICs on a server is quite common practice. So I'm happy. Actually, I'm not happy with that. So this being an ESXi server, it's going to serve multiple virtual machines. I generally give these hosts, I just pop up a calculator here, something like so 1024 for 1 gig. I think I might just give this 32, so 32768. Obviously, you'll change this depending on your own environment if you are following along. Fortunately, I have the capacity. On my host, I have 256 gig of memory on this host, so running a server at 32, I'll probably end up running 3 of these hosts at the same with the same memory capacity. So that should give us plenty of room to run up or spin up a number of VMs. Okay, that all looks good to me. Power on this virtual machine after creation, that's fine. And the installation, if you've not done one before, it's quite simple. This installer can actually take a few minutes to load up, so I might just, and it's going to finish pretty quickly up here, but I think it's just going to run another yellow bar. No, that's happy. Okay, yep, this is the part that can take a little bit of time, so I'll just pause and I'll just wait for this to finish up, and then we'll resume. Right, that actually didn't take too long at all. So we're presented with this screen, pretty straightforward. We want to continue with enter, and then 11 to accept the license agreement. Okay, I pressed F11, did something else because I don't have the function key on. Let's try again. Beautiful. And we're going to install the ESXi operating system to our 20 gig drive. So hit enter. So it's, as you can see, it's highlighted. US default is what I go for. And root password. So ESXi installs with a default root account. Very similar to Linux. The OS is kind of Linux based anyways. And hit 11 for the install. Now in the past, this doesn't really take too long to install. When it does finish, it won't actually automatically reboot. I think it'll prompt us to say the install's finished, remove the ISO from the virtual machine, and then do a reboot. So we'll follow that practice. And just on the left, we'll do a little bit of virtual machine tidy up while we're waiting. Bring this up into our Melbourne data center. Our environment's starting to grow a little bit from a kind of a physical server point of view. We'll end up having many virtual machines running inside our VMware environment as well. Okay, so it's just asking to remove the disk, which I'll do now. So I just uncheck those 2 boxes, and then it's disappeared, and hit enter. To be honest, I don't think it actually will do anything. When it reboots, it will still boot into the OS. It won't boot to the ISO again. But it's always good practice to just follow the prompts. So ESXi is just booting up. I might just pause the video here. Just wait for it to boot up and we'll recommence. All right, VMware up and running. It's picked up a DHCP address, so we're going to change those details. But the first thing what I might do is just flick over to our domain controller and head into DNS. So our JT Airlines internal zone. Just do a quick refresh. Okay. So two things. I'll just add an A record for our VSA server that we created in our previous video, which is 192.168.10.13. And happy with that. And I'll also create a record for our newly created ESXi host, which is going to be 192.168.10.21. And I'll just double check that in our diagram, our network diagram, management is 10.20.21. So that's what we're after. So happy with that. And we'll go add host. So one thing about VMware, we do need to make sure our DNS is up to date if we want to, especially as well with Veeam as well. Everything is generally dependent on DNS. So we need to make sure that these are always up to date and accurate. So let's jump back to our host. So F2 to get the ball rolling so we can log in with the root account and the password that we nominated at the installation. I double type something there, so let's just try that again. Yep, okay. And I'll have a little think and we'll get to the customization screen. And the only thing I really need to do here is just really configure up the management network. At this stage, Ethernet 0, VMNIC 0. So I've got two NICs, only one is being configured and assigned to the management network. So I just need to update the IP address. So storage space on my physical server, I might have to have a look at that. Okay. So static IP address, and we change this to 21. Subnet mask and gateway is exactly what we want it to be. I disable IPv6. As you can see, we will need to reboot the host. And DNS configuration, I'll make it static. I've only got one server for the time being. I will be adding a second one once we've got our VMware environment up and running. And just update the host name, ESX1. And the suffix is what we want it to be, jtairlines.internal. So once you're happy with that, you just hit escape. It's going to ask us to confirm and be okay with a reboot of the server. To apply settings, so I say yes. Restart in progress. And server now rebooting. If we just come back to our client machine here, just want to check those DNS entries. So that's working fine for the VSA. And that's working fine now for the ESXi host. And we're up and running. So we can now actually remote to the web interface of the host. So I'm back in my client PC, my administrator user, and what I can do now is go mail e61.jtairlines.internal. We'll get a certificate warning issue, so we're going to fix all the certificates up in a later video. And log in with the root account. Don't need to update the improvement program. This is just a lab environment. And we're away. So a couple of things to note when you install ESXi. We are running on a trial license for now. Fortunately, I've got some NFR keys that I use, but you do get, what have we got there? It says Friday, February 10. So what's that, a couple of months away. So yeah, you get a good 60 days worth of evaluation. I'm not sure, but you could probably email the licensing team at VMware if you are running this in a lab, and they might be able to give you an extended license. Just one thing to probably try. But otherwise, depending on your lab environment, sometimes, I only have labs running for 30 days at the most, 45 days, and then maybe I'll probably shut it all down and I'll start it fresh again. So depending on what I'm working on. Okay, so let's have a look at our networking. So we've got our actually storage. So this is our local storage. I normally rename these to, I always go like this, mail ESX1 and then local, just so that I know. So just so I know what's what, because when you start adding other storages from repositories from other appliances, you'll get them all in the list. At least I'll know that this particular data store is local to ESX1. So what we're really interested in is just the networking side of things. So by default, we get a virtual switch created for us with 2 port groups, one for management, which is what we're connecting to this server on, and one called VMware or VM network, which is where we would typically run our virtual machines from. No VLANs, and that's the way it's going to stay. So we won't be changing too much of this port group. Virtual switch information, so vSwitch 0, we know it's got 2 port groups, it's got 1 uplink. I want this to have 2 uplinks. So let's add uplink 2, done. And if I go back to my port groups, see here that this particular port group, actually now, is it going to both or is it going to one? Let's edit port group. Management network doesn't get the default settings generally. It has its own set of settings. And generally I just like to use inherited from the vSwitch, which inherit from the vSwitch, inherit from the vSwitch. Now this might be different in a real life production environment, but I just want the management network to work across both of those NICs. It was just working on vNIC 0 to start with, so now that port group will use both of those NICs. Beautiful. Okay. Physical NICs, NIC 0, vNIC 1. Okay. That's our VM kernel NIC, so we'll need to create an additional 3. So let us do that. Add a port group. So let's call this one iSCSI A. Do I want a dash or an underscore? Okay, underscore. It will go into that virtual switch. Happy for that. with iSCSI, so it's attached to this single switch with the two NICs, and by default, every time I create a port group now, it's going to use both of these NICs when required. But with iSCSI connections, you do actually have to nominate. For best practices, you've got to nominate just one NIC. So in this port group, I will have a specific setting. It's a NIC team setting, and it's just overriding the failover order. And so iSCSI A will use VMNIC 0, but will not use VMNIC 1. So I'll mark that as unused. So that makes this iSCSI port group compliant for an iSCSI connection. And then if I come back here and I create another port group, iSCSI B on the same switch, and I do the same thing here. I edit the settings, NIC teaming, override the failover order, and in this case now I will mark VMNIC 0 as unused, and VMNIC 1 is used. Just trying to see if it shows a good graphical representation. I don't think it does. I think it does in vCenter, but yeah, just to show you exactly how it looks. It's kind of here, but it doesn't quite show for some reason. In vCenter, you'll see that iSCSI A has just got this nice highlighted link to the one NIC. I mean, that might be it there. Let's have a look and see if, because that is going to oh no, it should be going to VMNIC 0. And iSCSI B, it just looks exactly the same. Not too fast. It's set up correctly. Yeah, we don't need to do anything else. Just one more port group, just for vMotion, and on the same switch. This one doesn't need any configuration. We're happy for vMotion to utilize both network adapters. Okay. My VMware connection, I'll get rid of that. So we'll just have a look at our VM kernel next. So we've already got one for management. We'll need one for iSCSI now. So on the iSCSI A, MTU 1500, we're not touching that. In some environments, you might have MTU running at 9000. And for iSCSI A, it's 192.168.11.21. So management is 10.21. iSCSI A is 11.21. And iSCSI B is 11.121. I'm setting it up this way. I think in some environments you set up iSCSI B on a totally different network, just for simplicity, because the VSA has only got one additional interface of 11.13. That we are only just using the 11.0 network. I'm pretty sure I could have configured the VSA for a 12, say a 12 or 13 dot network, and iSCSI B could have been on that network instead. That's probably the best way to do it, but I was just looking at simplicity for now. Later down the track, we'll set up Nimble storage as well, and that won't actually give us a choice. We will need to use two separate iSCSI networks, so that's just the way that I've got it set up for this lab. Right, so 11.21, 255, default TCP IP stack, and create. So there's one iSCSI NIC, VM kernel NIC sorted. Let's do the second one, iSCSI B, static, expand 192.168.11.121, 255, 255, 255.0, and no services. And then the last one is vMotion. vMotion, and static, and that's on the 12 network, 192.168.12.21, 255.255.255.0. And the only difference here is we just tick that box for vMotion. So if you're just wondering what vMotion is, so that's the ability to move virtual machines from one host to another, whilst the virtual machine's powered on. Sort of a hot migration from one server to another. Done. So that's our port groups all sorted out. So we've got the one vSwitch, which has both of those two physical NICs attached to it. We have 5 port groups, so 4 for the VM kernel ports and 1 for our virtual machine network. That's where we're going to install vCenter and all of our other virtual machines. And so lastly now, it's just a matter of setting up the access to the storage. I'm just going to try and remember how to do this from this console. I'm just so used to doing it through vCenter. We need to set up software iSCSI. So I don't have a physical iSCSI hardware adapter. So we're using software iSCSI, and we enable it. It's going to initialize it. And so there's a couple of things we just need to do here. We add actually I'll just hold short on that for a moment. The first thing I need to do is grab this. This is the alias for the iSCSI address, and we need to punch that into our, I think I said this in my last video when we created the storage appliance, but we need to punch this details into our storage management console. So we'll just log in. Just give it a moment. Okay, so just under servers, we just add a new server. This is ESXi, ESXi. The management IP is 21, and I've just copied and pasted that iSCSI alias name or the initiator node name. Done. I don't use CHAP, so we could use CHAP, so we could set up a password to access the storage. That's probably a more secure way to do that in a production environment, but I'm not too concerned, so I'll just leave it off. And lastly, we just need to assign volumes to this host, and we're happy for both volumes to be connected to this host in a read-write configuration, so it's got the permissions to edit. That should be enough here. So we just go back here, add the port binding. So this is just asking which ports on this server are going to interface with our iSCSI environment. So iSCSI A is one of them, and iSCSI B is another. And all we need to do now is add target, which is the virtual IP address of 11.50. We go back into here. We did create this before. Let's have a look where that is. Is it a cluster setting? There it is there. 11.50 is how we target this cluster of appliances. There is only one. So back here, 11.50, save configuration. Let's see what comes of it. Let's do a rescan. So it's going to rescan this iSCSI adapter, and hopefully it will find us some storage, which it has. 350 gig and a 300. So I think we made the 300 was the gold and the 350 was the silver. You can look into here, get a bit more information. And if we go back into, we can confirm that. So that's why I just changed the, there is a way by the LUN ID, but sometimes it's just easy just to, I just give it slightly, just for lab purposes, I'll give it slightly different sizes. So 300 is the gig, 300 is the gold, 350 is the silver. So now what we can do is actually, so that's just what this host can see. You can see that there are these devices, but they're not actually data stores as of yet. And we can create a new data store, create a new VMFS data store, and we'll call this Mel Gold Data Store. Just copy that. And we know that the gold is the 300. And we'll use VMFS 6. There is 5 if there's an absolute requirement for it, but there isn't in this lab. And I'm happy to use all 300 gig, use the full disk. And complete. Yes, I'm certain. And we'll do it again. New data store. And now only one to use, and I'll just change that in the middle to silver. And done. So our networking is all sorted. Our storage is all sorted, so we can see our data stores now. So Mel ESX1 local, it's the local SSD on this physical ESXi host, and then these two data stores which are iSCSI connected to this storage appliance. So now when we go to creating a new virtual machine, I won't do it in this lab, but we'll be able to what's it asking for? Okay, Windows, just as a two. So then we can choose where do we want to run this virtual machine from. We can choose a data store, and then we can also then choose the network. We have only one network that's available for virtual machines called the VM network, and away we go. Oh yeah, we definitely would change that to VMXnet 3, but so yeah, that's pretty straightforward really. Hopefully you've been able to follow along. I'll cancel that. So in the next video, we'll install a virtual machine into this environment, but it'll be done a little bit differently than most other virtual machines. So we're going to set up the vCenter. Once that's configured, we'll probably build a template in our vCenter for Windows Server 2012 R2. And I think my plan is to create a couple of virtual machines for our certificate authority. And that way we can assign the vCenter, the vSphere, the VMware, certificate authority. We can assign that as a subordinate to our newly created certificate authority, and then we can sign these machines so that we can get secure connections. So that's the immediate plan. So the next video is vCenter install. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you on the next one.